Introducing Professor Ari Saban. Ari is Bar-Ilan's president. It's a privilege and an honor for us that he's spending his time here tonight. I do want to say one thing, which is his first event as a president at Bar-Ilan University was in this auditorium when it was first, open. And it's a privilege for us that Professor Saban, you're here tonight with us. And with these greetings.
Can I speak in Hebrew?
No.
Yes. Huh? I'll tell you why in Hebrew. I'll speak in English, okay. No, because I'm excited, so... בעברית? עברית בעברית? So, look, in 1932, my grandmother finished her PhD, handed her PhD at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and moved to Israel, together with my grandfather. And since then, I have a big weakness, or is it weakness? Yeah. To effective, strong women. Women that wake up in the morning with the passion to make a difference in this world. And today we call it feminism, but whatever you would want to call it, that's the point where I have a weakness, and that's why I feel so obligated and so blessed to be speaking here, despite the fact that I didn't know Belda. I didn't know her. I didn't meet her. Of course, I had the privilege of meeting her partner, Blue, which I understand. Where are you, Blue? You were walking hand by hand, changing the world, together with Rabbi Professor Itz Greenberg. But you actually walked down the street, mainly in Manhattan, if I'm not wrong, changing the orthodox way of looking at women, or actually the role of women in the orthodox world. And someone told me to say, make the difference in the three houses, the three batim, in the Beit Midrash, Beit Knesset, and Beit Adin, right? So I didn't know Belda. I understand that, I know that she comes from a family that originally was from the founders of Bar-Ilan University, had a strong part, even herself later, as being the president of the American Friends of Bar-Ilan in New York. And the family donated in the law school and other activities. And here we are in the auditorium named after her. And first, many thanks to all those involved, to the family, Tamar, Ariel, Timna, and Moti. Adam? Is Adam here? Hi, Adam. And going back to the beginning, I believe that this is a place that makes a difference for me. This is a place where when I walk in, something happens to my heart. So Thank you very much for making this happen. A personal thanks to the family and to all the contribution. And many thanks to our three speakers of tonight. Rabbi Professor Itz Greenberg, that is connected to Bar Ilan for many, many years in different ways. Rabbi Kenneth Brander, the president of, well, he calls himself the Rosh Yeshiva, right, of Or Torah, Stone, which is a significant contributor to the education in Israel, and Harabanit Dvora Evron from Midreshet Lindenbaum, who also continues the path of women making a difference in our Orthodox Jewish world. Thank you very much. Enjoy the evening. A small apology. At some point I will disappear because I have another thing tonight. So big apologies, but remember that it's a big difference for me and hopefully for all of you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Timna Hurwich. I'm an Isha Psula, invalid, unfit for marriage to a Kohen. I'm divorced. More than 30 years ago, my then husband placed the get in my cupped hands and declared, "You are divorced from me from this moment on and permitted to any man." Correction. Permitted to any man except a Kohen. Observant Jews, and perhaps women in particular, can live a lifetime without noting the names or faces of the Kohanim who bless them, their loved ones, and their congregation each week. At 23, I took note. The bima had become a metaphoric red line I dared not cross. It instantiated my status, socially as well as religiously. I'm not sure when I first heard my Aunt Belda, aleh shalom, say, "It's halacha, it has to move." But for more than 2 decades, I said little and did nothing. Until someone said, "There are loopholes, you know." And I, in turn, began to question a sacred institution and the validity, the relevance of a halachic prohibition. And then, at last, I did something. This evening is the fruition, the culmination of an idea that no one seemed eager or willing to talk about a decade ago. Of course, I couldn't have imagined then that it would be realized in this place, on this occasion, or with this distinguished panel. Osher Mahul Be'etzev, a blend of joy and sorrow. Shehechayanu ve'kimanu ve'higianu lazman hazeh. And on that note, I'd like to introduce my cousin, Tamar Lindenbaum. Tamar, where are you? There you are. Belda and Marcel's eldest granddaughter, who is here, thankfully, to represent the Lindenbaum family. Tamar is a graduate of Barnard College and is spending this year in Israel teaching English at the Agron Elementary School in Jerusalem. Tamar.
Should I speak in English? I'm just kidding. I'm going to speak in English. That's my language. I'm going to do. First of all, thank you so much to Timna. Thank you to everybody who helped organize tonight. Thank you to all my cousins. Thank you to the panelists and to Professor Tzabar. And I want to give a particular thank you to Blue and Yitz Greenberg, who are not only very, very, very close dear friends of my Saba and Safta, but real-life Jewish rock stars, as are many of the other people in this room, but them in particular. I want to, first of all, I want everyone to know that I'm a very emotional person. It's been 3 years since my grandmother died and my grandfather died this summer. And I promise that if I cry, it's just because it's so real for me to stand here and speak about them. It is such a pleasure every time that I have the opportunity to talk about my grandmother. It's so amazing to get to talk about her. I swear I'm always trying to talk about her, and now I have a captive audience, so I'm very excited. I think the biggest challenge that I have in describing her is getting people to believe that she was as amazing as I'm about to describe, because she was so unbelievable. It's easy to think that I'm just describing someone who was not a real person, but she was a real person. She did all of these things. She went to every museum exhibit. She went to the ballet. She went to the opera. She went to modern dance. She introduced me to Alvin Ailey. She once called me a Philistine because I misidentified a piece of music she was listening to on WQXR. She loved that. She would be like, "You Philistine." She was incredibly well-read. She could have a conversation with anybody about anything. And she did that all by, along with keeping up with the lives of her 21 grandkids and her 5 children and their spouses, who all lived like really within a couple miles of her house. She did just everything. She was just amazing. She had an incredible eye for beauty. She had great taste in fashion. I'm wearing her shirt and her jacket right now. I always tell people 90% of the time, if you compliment what I'm wearing, it's something from her closet. When she died, people used to tell me, people would come up to me and they'd say, "You have such big shoes to fill." And I would have to reassure them. I would say, "We're exactly the same shoe size. I already took all of her shoes." Don't worry. My Savta always said she didn't start off as a feminist or somebody who was interested in women and Judaism, the particular combination. She married my Saba, Marcel Lindenbaum, after they met in Florida. They had this whirlwind romance. It lasted for 3 days before she called home and told her mom. She didn't call. Her mom was there. She said, "I'm getting engaged." And she and my Saba married, and they moved to New Jersey, and they lived this very normal, modern Orthodox life. And they had my father, Nathan. They had my uncles, Matthew and Bennett. And then in '67, they had my Aunt Victoria. They're very clever with naming. Points if you got that for '67. When I think about how people remember my grandmother, how she should be remembered, I think that a lot of it was very connected to the birth of my Aunt Vicky. My Saba told this story, that the morning that Vicky was born, he went to shul to daven, and he started to say the bracha of Shelo Asani Isha, thanking God for not making him a woman. And he said the words just caught in his throat. He felt like he couldn't get them out. How was he supposed to say something like that the morning that he had just had a daughter? And he went home to my grandmother, and he said, "How are you going to raise a daughter?" I feel like, what a man to put it on the woman, you know? But that question became a question that defined both of their lives, not just my Saba's life and not just my Savta's life, but it became this central question that revolved around everything that they thought about. How can you raise a daughter? And it expanded from being about my Aunt Victoria to being about my Aunt Abigail to being about my Savtas and nieces to being about all of the young women who she knew in her life, and eventually to being about her and how she felt as a woman within the Orthodox community, what she wanted her community to reflect, how she wanted to be treated. And then she read Blue's book on women and Judaism, and it pushed her over the edge. So if anyone's curious how she ended up the way she ended up, culprit is here. So my Savta started working with her sister, my super wonderful great aunt Carol Kaufman Newman, and with Blue. And together they started to make JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. And it was born with Blue as president and my Savta as the vice president. My Savta had this amazing idea that halachic Judaism had room for men and women to be treated equally. But in order for that change to happen, men and women had to start learning equally. They had to have access to the same texts and to the same tools. And that just wasn't happening. My grandmother told this story about when my Aunt Vicky was in high school, and they put her in home ec, where she would learn sewing and baking. And at the same time that she was in home ec, the boys would take a class on Tamei HaMikra and learn how to read the Torah. My grandmother was so frustrated by this. She said, "My daughter's not going to a trade school." And she pulled Vicky out of home ec, and she gave her a French tutor instead. And then the school board came to ask her for a donation to the school. And my grandmother said, "We would love to donate, but we're spending so much money on Vicky's French tutor. If only we didn't have to do that, we might be able," and they cut home ec from the course register. That's amazing. Goodbye, home ec. Good riddance. My Saba and Savta had a real sense of justice. They really did. They just couldn't believe that Judaism would be able to stomach anything unjust. And they believed that if there was something unjust within Judaism, the issue wasn't with the halacha. It was with the people who were interpreting the halacha. And that's what needed to change. She wanted to put the core of our Jewish tradition, the text, into the hands of women so that they could have a voice in decisions that were being made about their lives. This became her rallying cry. It's what drove my Savta to become a part of Drisha, where she eventually became board president, and to work with my Saba and Rabbi Riskin to start the programs at Midrashet Lindenbaum that allowed observant girls to learn Torah seriously alongside their army service, to fund a series of lectures at Hartman on women in Judaism, to join the board at Yeshivat Maharat, and so much more. My grandmother's love and belief in the power of education came very much from her father, my great-grandfather, Benjamin Kaufman, who felt the same way. As Professor Tabar said, the moot court in the law school is dedicated to his memory, and my Savta actually became involved in the school after he died, and she took over his board seat. And she loved being part of Bar Ilan. My mom said when she first started dating my dad, the only two things she heard at the dinner table were Agunot Bar Ilan, Agunot Bar Ilan. My grandmother's two great loves. I really think this Beit Midrash, this auditorium, is such a beautiful way to bring together her passions, Bar Ilan and women, her belief in the importance of a top-notch education, both secular and religious. I want to take a moment here to give Hakarat Hatov to my Saba, Elav Shalom, sorry, who was my grandmother's partner in absolutely everything, and stopped at nothing to make their dreams come true. And he was the one who sat with Michael Jesselson and made the decision to dedicate this space in her memory. And I have this little picture that's saved on my computer desktop, and it's from a dedication that he made after she died. And he just wrote, "Let's make Belda's dream a reality." I think it's amazing when I think about how much of my grandmother's dreams she was able to make a reality during her lifetime. Her dream of really opening up Jewish learning to Jewish women. And it's a real zchut to stand in a place where people make that come to life, a Beit Midrash where women get to learn Torah and take their Judaism into their own hands. I think the panel that's happening tonight is in the very same spirit that she and my Saba loved so much, a deep dedication to Jewish text and Jewish thought alongside the constant questioning that needs to happen to keep our Judaism vibrant and beautiful, and the endless move towards finding a more just way of practicing. Thank you guys all so much for coming here to be part of this dream that my grandmother had. I really appreciate it, and I know they did too.
Thanks, Tamal. That was very touching and emotional, and I appreciate the fact that you were so sincere with us and you gave us this opportunity to be part of your upraising in a little way. What I'll do now is I'll introduce all three speakers in order for them to be able to take a stand and then have their opening remarks and then conversation flow without my interfering. So I want to first, and I will, in order not to get any political issues here, I will introduce them in the order of their speaking. And that is not to say in any way anything about anyone's limud Torah in any matter, okay? So we're really privileged to have here three distinguished scholars. The first one is Rabbanit Dvorah Evron. You'll be opening, you can step up already. Rabbanit Dvorah Evron is the director of the Susie Branfeld Women's Institute of Halachic Leadership at Midrashet Lindenbaum. I would like to note that Rabbanit Dvorah Evron is a graduate of the Halacha program for women at Beit Morasha. She passed with distinction exams in all the realms of Jewish law. And she is also a very well-addressed and well-known scholar. I have to say that there's something I share personally with Dvorah, and that is the feeling that we were both the first of something, meaning Dvorah started off in Beit Morasha. When I studied 20-something years ago in Nishmat, it was the first year of the Yoatzot Halacha, and I think this pioneering experience in many ways frames the way we address women's issues and halachic issues today too. And I really feel it's a real pleasure to have a partner here on the stage. Thanks, Dvorah. Thanks, Rabbanit Evron, I should say. So the second speaker will be Rabbi Dr. Kenneth Brander. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for coming here. I want to say something about both the next two panelists. We actually all daven in the same shul. And I actually get blessed from Birkat Kohanim by both of these Kohanim. every single Shabbos when they're not abroad. It happens once in a while. Ariel does too, and so does John. So we have a little crowd here of Ramban members. And I have to say that ever since this panel was in the making, I have a different emotional experience towards this Birkat Kohanim. And I always look down to see which of them were there. So you were here this Shabbos, you weren't. But it is something that I think about again. And our shul is blessed with many Kohanim, and the understanding that in Chutz La'aretz it doesn't happen the same way, and we don't get blessed as often, also is something I started thinking about. But I want to go back to really representing Rabbi Kenneth Brander. He is the president of and the Rosh Yeshiva of Or Torah Stone. Or Torah Stone is a network of 27 educational institutions today, leadership development, outreach and vendors, women empowerment programs, and social action projects. I will say that he was a noted educator already abroad, and this is like this new experience of doing it all from Eretz Yisrael. We'll ask you in a few years down the road, what's the big difference in the ruach of Eretz Yisrael when these educational programs are in the making. So Rabbi Brander, please take your position too. And last but not least is Rabbi Professor Yitzchak Greenberg. We all call him Rabbi Yitz, but it's Rabbi Professor Yitzchak Greenberg. Rabbi Yitz is really a renowned scholar and has published in many venues. Preparing for this, I found out you had a website. You never told me. And it has actually all of Rabbi Yitz's writings. His books were also actually, one of his books was actually translated to Hebrew, and is also a very interesting and challenging intellectual experience when we're trying to figure out what's Jewish life about today and how to address the Holocaust and what we make of it today. I will also say that he used to be a congregational rabbi, and he still writes and in many ways takes rabbinic roles. So thank you very much, Rabbi Yitz, for being with us here tonight. We did decide that the conversation would flow among the participants, so I will be here back again to try to take questions and answers at the end. But at the first part of our panel, each of our panelists has prepared a presentation that will address this question of, as Timna introduced it, in the Kohanim and leadership roles in our Jewish lives then and today. And then there will be a conversation among the panelists, and then an opportunity for the participants to ask questions. So thank you very much, and I want to also thank a personal thanks to everyone who was involved in arranging this. First of all, Timna, who the idea of this panel actually came about in the last time I visited your grandfather on a Mikrofim in his house. The last Pesach he was alive, at that visit on Pesach afternoon, where I came to say thank you, and we mentioned the fact that Bar Ilan should have an annual lecture. That's part of the agreement, and it's a privilege to us. Timna came up to me and she said, well, I've had this dream for many, many years. It's something that I would really want to address. Maybe we can put one and one together. So I want to thank Timna personally for taking this venue with us. And I want to thank Bar Ilan's crowd for being here, and for every single one of you that made this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbanit Tova. I met Belda a number of times, not as often as most of you have, but I met her a number of times, and one of the times that we met, I gave her a women's Haggadah. Haggadah that has commentary written by women, and I shared with her a small tefillah that I wrote at the end of the Seder, when most of the family is asleep already, and I find myself just sending everyone off to bed so that I can quietly put the house back into order. And I read the tefillah with her, and we both had tears rolling down our cheeks. So I feel that being able to speak in her memory with her family here is something that brings me back to that moment in Manhattan. Another personal note is that this midrasha is actually the first place that I studied Torah seriously. I'm a graduate of this midrasha. It's the first place where I studied Gemara. It was not in this building. This building did not exist. It was in the old physics building from 1984 to 1986. And so you could do the math. And actually it brings good memories to be here, to speak, and I see it as a huge privilege. On that personal note, I should start and say that I am actually personally not connected to this panel. Not only am I not a Kohen, obviously, I'm not a Bat Kohen, and I'm not an Eshet Kohen. To emphasize what I'm talking about, I'll just say it like this. My father had a Pidyon Ben. My son had a Pidyon Ben. My nephew had a Pidyon Ben. And my grandson had a Pidyon Ben. I mean, that's about as not Kohen as you can get. So when Timna approached me on Sukkot, this past Sukkot, about this topic, I realized that it was something that I had learned, because you always learn about Kohanim, and actually the first part of the Arbat Turim that I studied and took exams on is Even HaEzel. And in Even HaEzel there are a few paragraphs, a few simanim that have to do with shvuyot, with women taken into captivity, and things that are related in some way to the movie that we just saw. And these were things that I always studied academically. They weren't anything that I even started to identify with or to relate to personally. I think the only time that it really went through my mind was when Gilad Shalit was brought home from captivity. It kept on going into my mind, well, if he was a woman, what would be the halachic ramifications? What would it mean? So when Timna asked me to learn towards this panel, I did it. I realized that I needed to revisit and re-listen to the things that I had studied about Kehuna. And so I find myself learning with two ears. One ear is to the Torah and the Poskim, and looking at halakha. Because when someone is born a Kohen, and this I'm talking as someone looking from the outside, when someone is born a Kohen, it brings with it certain obligations. When I read it, it looks like burdens, but it may not feel like burdens. I don't know. But the fact that there are women that they cannot marry, the fact that there are funerals or paying respect to people that pass away, that there are places that the Kohen can't go. These are things that are in the Torah, in the Torah, and then of course the Talmud and Halakha, etc. So when I read that, I realize that when someone is born a Kohen, there are things that maybe the person himself did not choose to have them as part of his life, but they are there. They are a fact of life. I also listen to what it says about women. Because, well, first of all, that's what I do a lot of the times. I try to listen with what we call a gender ear, or read with gender glasses. And I realize that this relationship between having kehuna as part of our Jewish heritage, the role of kehuna as part of our Jewish heritage, it also affects lives of others. Women that are divorced, women that are giyorot. And then it talks in a language that people are in roles. What we would talk about when we talk about either in psychological theory or in feminist theory, people in roles are people that we talk about as objects because they fulfill different roles that they are born into. The second ear that I listened with is an ear that I think that has been tweaked through many years of looking for feminist commentary, and that is the process of turning objects into subjects and asking myself, how does this, how do the texts, how does this, this role, this social structure translate itself into people's lives? That is what the film artist, the film director did with the movie we just saw. There were the texts. If you paid, I'm sure you all heard it, paid attention. The first place that the Bet Din went to was Ilchot Isurei Biyah, the Rambam. The first text was to Maimonides, and then they expanded to other texts, because halakha also goes through that process of from object to subject, to saying we have the law, but what we do is we translate the law into everyday life. So I was listening and reading about this question of kehuna with an ear of turning the object into subjects. And it raised a lot of questions. The first question it raised was, how wasn't I, that for many years I think I'm a very aware woman, how come I wasn't so aware of this and what was going on and how it influences people's lives? It's something that I didn't really pay enough attention to. That was one thing. The other thing was, there are more and more divorced people, men and women, and there are also more and more gerim and gerot in Israel. Many times in Israel, we solve problems without realizing that they create another problem. For example, when the Ethiopian Jews, the Jews from Ethiopia came to Israel, Rav Ovadia Yosef decreed them Yehudim. However, he said, but we should have a giyur lechumra. Even though I believe that they're Jewish, they should go through a giyur, so that will be 100% that they're Jewish. What that means is that the women that went through the giyur lechumra will eventually not be able to marry Kohanim. And this is something that we see more and more. We want to make sure that they're Jewish, which is fine. But what it also means is that they will not be able to marry Kohanim. And so we see the numbers going up more and more, and people being influenced more and more by decisions that are being made. Now, I'm not sitting here right now with a halachic solution. The reason that I want to talk about, that I agreed to talk about this topic, is because I feel that we are not aware enough as leaders, as as part of the Orthodox community, as part of people in Israel that are socially involved, I don't think, I feel, well, I wasn't aware enough, so maybe other people weren't aware enough of what happens in people's lives. Usually, I find myself saying, well, mainly women are influenced. But I think this is a topic where both women and men are influenced. And it's something that I think that in order for there to be some kind of solution down the line, and maybe I'll talk about that a little later. Not about I don't find myself having a solution of when that a gosha can be permitted to a kohen. That's not something that I mean. But I have some other ideas about what I think we we the people and also the halachic thinking can lead in order for us to minimize as much as possible the implications of this burden of kehuna and women. And I think that it is definitely a question of leadership. And because I think it's a question of leadership, I think that definitely people and rabbis that are leaders and are kohanim and have also firsthand knowledge, I think that focusing on leadership is a very, very important part of this issue. And so I'd like to hand the microphone over to Rabbi Brander, who will address the question of leadership with kehuna as a paradigm of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbanit.
Thank you.
I'd like to actually begin my words with a comment to Tamar. I found your words very moving. I knew your grandmother when I was a rabbinic intern at Lincoln Square Synagogue and spent some time engaging with her, and many years ago. And before I took this position, Rabbi Riskin brought me to spend some time with your grandfather, of blessed memory. And your grandfather, he gave me like 20 minutes to feel at home in his apartment. We were sitting in that like living room area. And then he asked me a question. And I had just like started, it was the beginning of the chafifa, of the transition. So your grandfather asked me, Nu, what would you change at Midrash at Lindenbaum? And first of all, he let me know that it wasn't named in their honor, but it was named, he went through this whole thing. I don't want to bore you with the story you already know. I want to focus on one that I'm sure you don't know. So he said to me, what would you change? I said, the first thing is that there's this wonderful program, the Manhigot program, which Rabbanit is responsible for and does a magnificent job. But it bothers me that they're learning for 5 years. They're taking the same bechinot as men take for the Rabbanut. And there's no one in charge of making sure they get great positions. No one's making sure they get jobs. They're getting jobs, in my opinion. I think they're a little underemployed. I think they're doing great work. But there's no one making sure that they get jobs. It's no one's it's everyone's responsibility, which means it's no one's responsibility. So I said to your grandfather that I want to make sure that there's somebody responsible to make sure that they have internships, they have jobs, and when they get jobs, there's someone that helps them during that transitional time, especially in Israel, when playing leadership roles that they should be playing in synagogues, as spiritual leaders, in the army. Many of them have gone through the army, in the police force, and in other places, in hospitals. I want to make sure that there's someone responsible. So I'm here to say that although I had that conversation with your grandfather like a year ago, as of April 1st, there will be somebody in that position. So I feel like I'm able to at least honor a commitment that I made to your grandfather. And as of April 1st, there will be somebody whose job will simply be to make sure that even though we have no one graduating for the next 2 years, that person's job will be to make sure, under the leadership of the Rabbanit and of others, to make sure that there's a special stage internships for each one, that there's a special program that works on their professional development, not only on their bechinot, and making sure that in 2 years' time, I'm able to look at the founders of Lindenbaum and basically say to them, we're building stage 2 of what you always wanted, to make sure that there are appropriate roles for women throughout Medina Israel, as well as making sure they play leadership roles throughout Tfutzot, throughout the diaspora. So I want to personally thank the Lindenbaum family for the opportunity to be able to move the story forward. Etched throughout Sefer Vayikra, the book which Chazal called Torat Kohanim, are two paradigms of leadership. Two paradigms of leadership. And that is the priest and the prophet. Moshe is the quintessential prophet, and Aaron is the quintessential priest. And there are two fundamental differences between the Kohen and the Navi, between the priest and the prophet. One fundamental difference is the Kohen's Kedusha is based on his begadim, his vestments. The Gemara tells us, Kedushat Kohen, Kedushat Begadi. The Kohen's holiness is predicated on his clothing. If the Kohen is missing even one of the garments that he must wear, even the belt, he cannot perform the service in the temple. The Navi, it didn't matter what he or she was wearing. He or she could be wearing a suit or a tuxedo or jeans and a t-shirt. As long as they were able to interact with God, the Navi's ability to fulfill his or her communal responsibility was not cloaked in his or her external appearance. The second difference is a Kohen is a Kohen for only one reason, because his father was a Kohen. It totally depends on yichus. And why does lineage play any role in determining who represents the Jewish people in the tabernacle or in the temple? For the Navi, it does not matter who his or her father or mother was or is. The Navi can be a product of an incestuous relationship between Yehuda and Tamar, the product of a controversial convert by the name of Ruth, and the Navi could still be David HaMelech, it could still be David, the prophet and the progenitor of the Mashiach. And I believe that the difference between the Kohen and the Navi, these two paradigms of leadership, and the fact that halacha has these two very stark differences, is that they represent two different components of the religious experience and two different paradigms of leadership. On the one hand, Judaism has what I would call the structure and the form of mitzvot. There's a sense of eternality to Judaism when the rituals are the same on a not just an annual basis, but on a generational basis. I'm participating in a tradition, in a covenantal relationship that's thousands of years old. And that's a crucial part of the religious experience. It says, you know, what I do is what my great-grandparents did. It says that when I have on the Pesach table, I have the kos, I have the cup of my grandfather or my grandmother. It says that there's such a thing about Jewish continuity, about the continuation from generation to generation. It guarantees a certain sense of the immortality of the Jewish experience. Now, we have to understand the Kohen's job was to be the guardian of ritual. That's the Kohen's job. The Kohen is the guardian of the structure and the form of the ritual. He's not about paskening questions. He doesn't answer she'elot unless he has to answer certain she'elot of leprosy, and the Gemara is very clear. If he doesn't know anything, he has to bring somebody who really knows scholarship. But the bottom line is the Kohen's major job is that he's responsible to be the guardian of ritual. He's responsible for the external components of Judaism. He's responsible to make sure they're guaranteed without compromise. And therefore, I believe, that's why the Kohen's holiness is also predicated on externals, namely his vestments, his bigdei kahuna, and his yichus, and his lineage. The Kohen is about guaranteeing the externals, and therefore his holiness is predicated on the externals. But I think every one of us in this room knows, and that's what leadership is all about, that Judaism cannot be about just maintaining the status quo. Judaism cannot be about the reason why I celebrate Shabbat or observe Pesach is because my grandparents did or my great-grandparents did, because what happens is then the commandments become dead symbols. Judaism has to be relevant in the here and now. Judaism has to affect my gestalt on life, my Weltanschauung. Judaism has to speak to me in the here and now. That's why the prophet often yells at his co-leader, the Kohen, and says, Lama li rov zivchechem yomar Hashem. Why does God need the structure and the form of rituals if they've become dead symbols? The role of the prophet is to be a leader that imbues Judaism with relevance to contemporary society, to contemporary challenges. That Judaism does not lose its purposefulness. That Judaism affects me in the here and now. That halakha, within the parameters that it has given us, and as you study halakha, you realize how large those parameters are, speaks to us in the here and now, and calibrates the spiritual compass of the Jewish people. And for me, what that tells me is that we need to operate on both the paradigm of Kohen and Navi simultaneously. So for example, as somebody who has recently become in charge of 27 institutions, many of them focusing on women's issues, I understand that maybe 60 years ago, or even less than that, but let's use 60 as a, women didn't play leadership roles within the Jewish community. But the bottom line is, that's not something that is a halachic limitation. That's a social, societal limitation. And the Navi paradigm, predicated on the responsibilities of maintaining and increasing the holiness of the structure and the form, the Navi paradigm tells me that I have a responsibility as a Kohen to make sure that Judaism speaks to the here and now. And if I rob the community, not just women, if I rob the community of women playing leadership roles, it doesn't just affect my granddaughter, it affects my grandson. And I need to make sure, because halakha demands that of us, to make sure that there is a place for women to play a leadership role, because it enriches our entire society and the entire community. It is the Torah of Dvorah HaNeviah. And there is a plethora of tshuvot from the Pitchei Tshuva and dozens more that allow women to play significant halachic roles. And when people suggest that there aren't, either they haven't read the sources or they wish to ignore the sources. And so for me, the responsibility of the Kohen and Navi tells me that I have a responsibility to make sure that I follow the traditional pathways, but I recognize that I have to imbue them with relevance. If I ignore the paradigm of the Kohen, if I ignore the tradition, then I think I lose the context of authentic Judaism. But if I ignore the paradigm of the Navi, of imbuing Judaism with a responsibility to the here and now, then I think I ignore the responsibility of making sure that Judaism is relevant to the here and now. And therefore, I think that we have to make sure that our Judaism speaks to the larger issues. How can it be that the LGBTQ community does not feel comfortable in the Orthodox community? It doesn't mean that I have to celebrate a lifestyle, but at the same time, I have to make sure that the Torah community welcomes all. That's not being a nice citizen of the world. That's being a halachic Jew, which is also part of being a nice citizen of the world. But that's part of the responsibility of being a halachic Jew. That's the paradigm, the yin and the yang of the relationship between the Kohen and the Navi. How can it be that so many of us spend time in jail to let Soviet Jewry out of the Soviet Union, and we haven't figured out a way to deal with all the halachic challenges? How can that be? Today, as we speak, an institution that Rabbanit and I have a relationship with, Yad L'Isha, is representing at this moment 62 women who are agunot in the Batei Din Rabbani, in the Israeli rabbinical courts, and hundreds more, giving them all different types of help. If Torah is v'chol netivotei shalom, if all the pathways of Torah are supposed to be ones of morality, how can it be that we still have agunot? The responsibility of the Kohen and the Navi calls upon us to act upon these issues. A responsibility reminds us that we must follow the paradigms of the Kohen, of religious tradition, but also celebrate the ideas of the Navi, of the capacity to be leaders that use halachic creativity to make a difference in society. And please God, when we understand that Sefer Vayikra, the book of the Kohanim, is not just about the responsibilities of the particular Kohen, that 2 out of 3 of us are part of the family, but reminds us that all of us in this room are Kohanim, because we're part of a Jewish community that has a responsibility to be leaders and engage within society, then we truly will understand that our responsibility is to be both the Kohen and the Navi, the priest and the prophet, and to make sure that Judaism constantly celebrates its halachic norms with relevance and engaging within the challenges of a contemporary society. Thank you.
I do want to say that it's a privilege and to be at your site, or if you will, an annual memorial lecture in memory of Bella and now Marcel. My wife and I were not just friends, we were enormously attached and admired them. They're really our role model of what a modern Orthodox Jew could be and should be. Sorry, can you hear me? And so it's a privilege to be in one small place which carries the memory and reminds us, as we just heard, of so many things that they pioneered and that we have to carry on. I want to show you also that I do, before the evening is over, I hope to get a chance to address some of the really problematic issues that have been raised very powerfully here. But in this first round, as the Gemara says, Posken b'kavod shel achsanya, you open with praise for the host institution, and as I am a Kohen myself, I am a member of that host institution, Kahuna, and I therefore want to speak at first about personal praise of what Kahuna has meant in my life, in my personal life. I am a Kohen all my life, and since the time I grew old enough to realize the significance, it's been a source of joy and pride, a feeling. It made consciousness of God more aware in my life, the Kohen being in a special relationship. I felt it's been a privilege to be a source of blessing, especially in Birkat Kohanim. The truth is, I find it very inspiring, and in particular, it has been very much fixed in my mind by a magnificent passage in Rav Soloveitchik's presentation of the mitzvah of Birkat Kohanim, and he points out, the bracha says, Asher kitsham tzavetzivanu levarech et amo Yisrael b'ahava. And he says, therefore, you don't really fulfill the mitzvah of blessing the kahal unless you do it b'ahava. And then he says, what does that mean? Well, he says, in that minute, from the time you get up on the shtenda, on the bima, until they call you and you turn to give the bracha, he said, in that moment, the Kohen should empty himself consciously of all negative feelings, emotions, anger, hatred at people, any people, and try to fill himself consciously with a sense of ahava, love, unqualified love for the community and for the people in his life. And if you do that, he says, then you let the flow of blessing from Hashem to the people, because you're not giving the blessing, you're just a channel. But if you remove all the impediments, all the anger and the hatred and the rejection, then you will feel that sort of that power, force of life flowing through you into the congregation. And the truth is, every time I go up to Duchen, I think of that and I have that sense of anticipation and feeling. Now, over the years, it goes much beyond that. Torah Kohanim, which is just not just, as Rabbi Brenda pointed out, Vayikra, the whole book which we're starting to read right now, but also Torah Kohanim and Torah Sheval Peh, the Medrash, and indeed much else of the Torah Sheval Peh, has really profoundly influenced and shaped my thinking and really drawn me to what I've now come to feel is my core understanding of Yahadut. And that is that the infinite creator, God, who loves life, who sustains life, and who nurtures it, it grows in the ground of God until it becomes more and more developed. It becomes finally Tselem Elokim, God-like in its power. That this God loves human life and loves the world they live in, and therefore wants this world to be perfected. That therefore God enters into a breed, into a covenant, into a partnership with humanity first, Noah, and then with Israel, the people of Israel, as a kind of a lead partner, if you will, or a pioneering partner. And the commitment, the breed on both sides, is that they will partner together to fill the world with life. In the words of Isaiah, the world was created not to be empty, but to be filled with life. Secondly, to upgrade society and nature so that life is treated with its fullest dignity and its fullest value. And the last, so you have both quantity and quality of life. And last but not least, this is the commitment to literally perfect the world. That's what Mashiach and Messianism is about, which is that we are committed totally to push life in this world to the point where we overcome, and Nevi'im spell this out, all the enemies of life will be overcome. And that includes poverty, hunger, oppression, inequality, injustice, all these things which deny or degrade the quality of life. War, remember Isaiah's famous line at the UN, right? To beat swords into plowshares, that's all part of the commitment of the breed, to overcome sickness itself. Yeshayahu spells out, we're talking about in the Messianic age, where deafness will be cured, where the blind will see, where the lame will dance. This is the commitment that we undertook in taking on the breed. And therefore, the ultimate goal and the ultimate dream is to so achieve the perfection of the world that Bila Hamavat Lanetzach, that life will expand and death will be rolled back. Kahuna is the institution that incarnates this idea, and I've come to see that that's one of the primary teachings and insights of Torah Kohanim. Because the classic problem it's a beautiful vision. Perfect the whole world, overcome death, fill it with life. It sounds great, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take a long time. The critical question always is, how do you go through generations without losing the vision? Or worse, settling down and accepting the status quo and selling out to it. So how do you keep that push, that vision, that demand for perfection and improving the world alive? The Torah's answer is educationally. You create a mini cosmos. Our goal is to perfect the whole planet. But you create a mini cosmos inside the community right now that exemplifies and that communicates the power of this actual vision being alive right now. Of course, you do that in time. That's what Shabbat is about. For 24 hours, you live in a messianic world, and that means no work to do. What do? You live, you deepen. In other words, embrace life and live it fully. Live it with family, live it with emotion, live it with a connection to Hashem. On Shabbat, you, in effect, put aside or you take away, you take care of hunger and poverty, so that for 24 hours, people really exemplify a living, dynamic reality, and then you realize, whoa, so this is doable, or this is worth working for, or this is worth fighting for. What you do in time, of course, is what you do in space, in the Mikdash, and that's what the Mikdash and the Mishkan is all about. You try to create a perfect space, and the most striking quality of that space, of course, is that you come into this room, you feel God is there, almost you can touch it. But why is that so? Because the fact that God is there means that no death is there, it's all life. No human death, no human exposure to death, that's a tumah tamed, is allowed in the Beit HaMikdash. And in case you missed that very clear message, the Kohanim who represent God, who are working full time, the Kohanim are really the future Jewish average person, or the future average human being. They represent as if we're living already in the presence of life, having won out over death. And their Kedusha and connection to God is that they are not to have any contact with death, the Kedusha of death, right now. And the physical specimen, that the Kohen can't have a mum, is also part of that messianic vision that someday in the world that we want to get to, and that we feel responsible to make, we'll overcome handicaps, and we'll overcome physical infirmities, and we will cure diseases, and we will defeat Alzheimer's, and that's what the vision is supposed to be represented. So when you come to the, and by the way, it's not just physical perfection, that the building is beautiful. It's meant to be moral perfection, as you know from the Tehillim. It's believed by scholars that's exactly what happened. When they came up to the mountain and they wanted to go up to the Beit HaMikdash, they were asked by the guards, by the Leviim, Mi ya'aleh b'har Hashem u'mi yakum b'mkom kadsho. Who are you who dare or want to rise on the mountain, come up to God's house? And the answer is, you had to answer. I'm not coming here as a crook, I'm not swindling, I'm not, so that it was an attempt to say, go into a physical space where life is perfect, where physical space are perfect, where morality is perfect, and then come out and be inspired to say, well, I'm going to go back and change what's going on out there till it resembles this place. So the Torah Kohanim, in fact, if I can summarize it, it's a quote, of course, from Rav Soloveitchik in Halachic Man, who opened my eyes to this whole dimension. And he says, the priests of God are forbidden to defile themselves with the dead, because the higher the holiness, the greater the prohibition against defilement. And then he goes on to say, why? Because Judaism abhors death and dissolution. Why? Because it bids one to choose life and to sanctify it. So the message is not just to avoid death, the message is you're supposed to go out there and improve life and embrace it and live it deeply and not just superficially. Torah Kohanim continues. That's what Vayikra is about. It took me years to realize it. But you look at Vayikra, all these laws, Tumah, Tara, which appear to be, if you're lucky, if you're well at a remote, and they don't really practice much more anymore. But, well, it's not. The Tumah, Tara code is really the code of life against death. And the Metzora and the Zav and so on, these are sicknesses which are considered Tameh in that state, because they represent dissolution of the body, organic decay, and death. And the rebirth and the purification ritual, including mikveh, goes back to the restoration of life and the reaffirmation of life. And then Nida itself. what need itself represents, is the tumah, the death of an egg that was not fertilized, that has not given birth to life. And then after that flow of blood ends, the mikvah and the resumption is not just, it's the resumption of life, it's the resumption of sexuality and the fullness and the embrace of life. And so again, the code is not some abstract ritual code. It's meant to be a statement about how do you live a human full life that is truly holy. And one could go down the list. Kashrut is all about reverence for life, and no time to go through all the details right now. In fact, in Kedoshim, Torah Kohanim reaches the ultimate climax of its teaching, which is that death and life is not just ritual and Tum and Tara, it's about ethics and non-ethics. That is to say, choosing lotigno, to steal, latashok, to exploit, these kind of things, that's the choice of death. And choosing ohafturecha kamocha, choosing not to spread false or malicious tales about somebody else, choosing to take care of the poor, those are the acts of life. So the Torah Kohanim, and this is my conclusion, this is the implication of a kahuna, which I'll come back to in terms of one of the problems. What it's trying to get across, Torah Kohanim, is that Judaism is a religion of life. It's trying to help people live life more deeply, more completely, and what it's really saying is every mitzvah, that should be a working principle. Every mitzvah is meant to increase your life or your quality of life. It's meant to live on the side of life or on the side of quality of life. It's meant for you to oppose degradation of life, denial of the quality of life, reduction of the dignity of life. And you should work as your guiding principle in every mitzvah to make sure that it does just that it increases life for you or for others, or it avoids or rejects degrading and harming and causing suffering and destruction of somebody else's life. So to summarize, this is what Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim. Moshe, when he summarizes the Torah, says, Re'ei natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim v'et hatov, et hamavet v'et hara. Says Rambam, notice how the Torah, and Moshe has lined it up. On one side it's chayim and tov, and on the other side it's mavet and ra. Every mitzvah, every positive act is a choice of life and should have some impact on improving life. Every avera, every sin is in some way a choice of death or degrading of life, and therefore these are synonyms. Life is the definition of good, good is the definition of life. And death is bad, and evil is the definition of choosing or working on the side of death for yourself or somebody else. And so, to me, the amazing and important challenge is, on one hand, Kahuna preaches this and represents this Torah. The other question, which we'll get to in the next round, is what are the problematics? What if, in fact, the way you practice Kahuna, the way you rule halachically about it, in fact, instead of ending life, or instead of increasing life or strengthening life, becomes the enemy of life, or becomes the undermining of family and of quality, and that I'll come back to in the next session.
Thank you. No, בסדר? Thank you. As I was listening to both your presentations, I thought again of my family, because as we know, during Talmudic times and a little before, there was a sort of competition between the Kohanim and the Talmidei Chachamim. And eventually, known as the Prushim, the discussion between the Tzdokim and the Prushim. And eventually the Prushim are those, the Chachamim are those, that some of them were Kohanim also, as in this panel, of course. The Torah Prushit of the Chachamim is the way that the Torah Sheba'al Peh went. And we know that Torah, Talmud Torah, is not inherited. It is not something that goes from father to son, and in our generation, Bezrat Hashem, from mother to daughter, mother to son, etc. But it is something that is koneh. You have to buy it, you have to learn it and study it each time again and again. It's not something that you inherit, it's something that you need to study. But still, as I'm very privileged to be of a family of Talmidei Chachamim, you still inherit stories, and you inherit a way of thinking. And one of the things, as I was listening to the things you were saying, it reminded me of a story about my great-grandfather, Rav Frank. And the story was told by one of his meshamshim that studied Hilchot Kashrut with the Rav, with the Hartzvi. And he was with him usually on Fridays when women brought the chickens to be checked if there's a problem or not. And two women each one brought a chicken, and it sounded like they were asking the same question. And the Rav said that one chicken is kosher and the other chicken isn't kosher. So the Talmid asked him, how can it be that this chicken is kosher and this chicken isn't kosher? The chickens look the same. So the Rav said to him, you're looking at the chickens and I was looking at the women that were asking the question. Meaning that when you look when you translate everything, even Hilchot Kashrut, into the specific people that you're talking to, if there's a Hafsed Merubeh, if there's a great loss, if it's something that in one place you'll be more machmir and another place you'll be more lenient, then even the halachic answers can be different. And it also brought to mind, I think, Rav Yitzhak, you were talking about this sort of utopia, or this whole world, and also Rabbi Brander about the Kohen holding on to the ritual and making sure that it is whole. It also reminded me that I teach a weekly class in Gemara where I live, and just recently we finished Masechet Chagiga. Masechet Chagiga is a part of the Talmud that talks about bringing the Korban Chagiga, the sacrifice of Chagiga, on Shlosht HaRegalim, on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And the first sugya, the first part of the Masechet, talks about who is allowed to come to Bet HaMikdash to bring this sacrifice, and who should not. So putting aside women even for a minute, because they should not, only someone who is physically whole can come to Bet HaMikdash, and for this sacrifice. And as we were learning it, many of the women in the group felt that this part of the Talmud, this Mishnah and then this Gemara, were in dissonance to what they realized was the main message, the main idea of Yahadut, as you pointed out, of course, to be inclusive. That any person, the way they are, that is the perfection of that person. And so I think that one of the things that we have today is that that our way of thinking challenges, or definitely is in some sort of dissonance to many of the things that were talked about. And I just want to point out one other thing, is that I'm asked a lot about what do women bring to the halachic table? Because we study the same texts and we take the same exams that men take, and we learn halacha as halakha should be learned. And one of the things that I think that we bring to the table, to the halachic table, is that we sit in Ezrat Nashim. Meaning we see the women and we our friends, and we see what many of the women are going through. And so a lot of the halachic issues that many of the men see how they translate for their friends, the men that sit next to them in shul, we see how many of these issues translate for our friends and the women that sit next to us. And I think one of the main things that we bring to the table is acknowledging how halakha influences our friends and our sisters and our mothers and our daughters and all the women that we see, and kehuna influences many women as it influences men, but we see the women. And so I think that this has to be addressed because Yahadut is not theoretical. There are great ideas, and I think that both of you brought these beautiful and deep and very important ideas. And at the same time, these are lives and people that are living them. So I think maybe again, this is me looking from the outside on Kehuna and bringing this to be looked at, because even as we were watching the movie, and I saw this movie many years ago, and of course it hit me as it hits everyone, that in order for the couple to continue being together, they have to ignore that there was a rape. And that makes it almost impossible in my book. Definitely as a therapist, I'm a psychodrama therapist. So not acknowledging what people go through is something that is very, very difficult. And the pain that this halakha that I love so much is using this way in order to enable them to go on living is something that really at least hurts. So I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts either about what was said or to expand on the things that you were talking about beforehand.
Well, I did not see the movie. I wasn't aware it was being shown. But I think that one of the important things that needs... I'd like to focus on the Rabbanit's point on two different levels. I think that leadership requires one to make a decision about what issues he or she wants to focus on, and recognizing that while in a perfect world you want to focus on everything, in a real world you can only focus on certain things. From my perspective, some of the things that I've mentioned in my initial presentation, I think are issues, even though the issues of the fact that a wife of a Kohen, if God forbid she's raped by a non-Jew, whether they can continue to stay married or not is something that bothers me terribly, both on a personal level as well as on a communal level, theological level. Or the fact that a Kohen who's lost a child, which the two Kohanim here have lost children, have a hard time visiting the graves. Those are challenges that I can just speak personally, are challenges that is one that's hard to follow and hard to deal with. And that when you lose a child, you have to make sure that you have the presence of mind to think about finding a plot that allows you to be able to visit without an obscured view. There are plenty of issues that I struggle with, and to suggest that there aren't struggles would be intellectually incorrect. However, I was comforted by Rabbi Greenberg's, I thought, beautiful understanding of a Kohen really being the agent of a messianic age. I really enjoyed that pshat. I never heard it before. I really thought it was an excellent understanding. I mean, the migration of Torah Kohanim is something that is well developed, and I appreciated that. But that beautiful understanding of a kuna was, for me, was a new pshat, and I appreciate it. But I could spend the rest of my time thinking about how to deal with some of those issues. I just think that I think that with all the challenges that this world has, and again, maybe this is not a real answer, I would rather focus on the issues that don't just affect my family, my larger family. There are so many issues that I mentioned, whether it's the Aguna issue, whether it's just injustice in general, whether it's the way we deal with refugees, the way we deal with, as a majority people in the state of Israel, with minorities, including Arabs. You know, we have 5,000 students at Or Torah that we train to be soldiers. 5,000 students. The vast majority serve in combat units, and a good percentage of them serve as officers in combat units. And I think that we're no different than the rest of the religious Zionist community that doesn't spend enough time training them how, when they have to play leadership roles on the battlefield, how they look at the other. For me right now, those are the priorities that I want to struggle with and that I want to try to deal with. On the other hand, I think some of the issues that you mentioned in your presentation, Rabbanit, like for example, the Safek Gerut L'Chumra, I'm not so convinced that, for example, in the case of fertility and halacha, when you have a surrogate, a mother who's Jewish, and a donor egg from a non-Jew, and we do Gerut Misafek, I would have no problem performing that wedding to that child that was done a Gerut Misafek. I'd have no problem performing that wedding if that young lady born from that was marrying a Kohen. Now, I would do it in a heartbeat. Because I think that Gerut Misafek is an important idea, one that I advocate, one that I actually taught last week in one of our kololim, but it doesn't predetermine all the time how 20 years later or 30 years later, how you deal with issues of chuppah v'kiddushin. It's just basically trying to stack the deck according to all the shitot, which is something that Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, as well as others, would always advocate, including, whatever, there's not the time to go through a list of poskim. But the bottom line is that I think there's two things. One is, I think that we have to prioritize what are the challenges of this generation and which ones we should focus on. And for me, I think the ones I've articulated, I think, are the challenges. It doesn't mean that there aren't other issues when someone is representative kuhuna. And the final piece of that is that I'm not sure that all the issues of kuhuna are as binary as always they're presented. And I just cited one example of Gerut L'Chumra, just to posit that.
Well, so I guess what I was trying to describe is, if Guna is so wonderful, and I do really feel it is, and if it's such a beautiful religious symbolism, and it meant so much to me in my life, so how did I become an unfulfilled Kohen? That's to say, with all the serious questions I'm about to raise. And the honest answer is it's a learning and growth process. And Rabbi Brenda was very honest and I think very correct in saying that I didn't fight on this issue particularly because I had so many other issues. I decided I'm not going to get anywhere with this one, so the others are more urgent. But go in order. So the truth is, first of all, my own consciousness was raised, and I began to realize at one point that all these wonderful privileges, which I get, by the way, again, you understand, I'm the most satisfied person in the world with the halachic system. I have no dissatisfaction at all. Anything I say about it that's critical is pure selflessness because I have all its privileges. I am a rabbi, I am a man, I'm a Kohen. So there's absolutely no disadvantages that I have in the system. Having said that, it began to dawn upon me with some help, with some consciousness raising from my wife, that I'm enjoying all the privileges of a system which is treating other people in the system as less than equal and as less than fully human in some cases. And not just women, how about disabilities? Before we get to the question of gay people and other people. So it dawned upon me that I'm enjoying all these benefits, but I'm not facing the reality of, is that legitimate in a situation where other people are being deprived? The second step is, of course, nothing like reality to hit you in the face. I became a rabbi, and people came to me with shilas. And one of the shilas that came to me was a Kohen and a Grusha. And again, I'm full of all these beautiful images of the perfection of the Kohen. And they come and they tell me, they're madly in love. And the woman says, what you're telling me is that I'm Sula, I guess you say, I'm disabled, I'm not able to marry this person. And it dawned upon me, when I listened to both sides, that indeed what I'm telling them is that halachically they must obey the law, and even that means giving up love, relationship, marriage, family, all the things that would be the most positive things. And frankly, it went through my mind even then, I just didn't face up to it. Is this what it means the halakha is pushing life and affirmation of life? Anyway, I didn't face it up to it yet. But what happened next? So again, I told them, I basically defended the law. I'm sorry, I feel bad, but I basically defend the law. The second step was, of course, it really bothered you. The more people that came, and along came Rav Moshe Feinstein, and I thanked him. I mean, not personally, but said, have a solution for some people, namely, that if the Kohen comes from a non-observant family, of an unlearned family, you have a right to say their presumption, chazak of kahuna, is not really dependable, reliable, because they're not observant and they don't know anything anyway. So you can assume that their claim that their kohanim is really fictitious or not reliable, and therefore you can allow them to marry as a regular Yisrael. I really didn't like the solution personally, because again, I felt, first of all, that it shows contempt for non-observant and non-learned people, which was a big problem of Orthodoxy in general. But no less, it was really penalizing. If you're observant and you learn it, take that. So you lose love. I mean, so I felt it was really a very bad psychology, but I said, look, in the meantime, I'm giving these two people a chance to marry and fulfill their love, so I kind of went along with it. And I started to recommend when people would come, and that was the background. Of course, I still wasn't happy with what was happening next. So the turning point for me came as follows. I was working for Klal at the time, and I was traveling a lot. I became very friendly and very close to a family in the Midwest. I will not identify the city or the people. The head of the family, the father, was really a magnificent person, and about being good and kind and ethical and so on and so forth. He really built one of the main builders of the Orthodox community, and then he was in the Federation and the general community, one of the main leaders and builders. He was really Kiddush Hashem. I mean, he was a wonderful person. And by the way, full disclosure, he became a supporter of Klal, and when I would go through that city, they would invite me, I'd stay in their home, and I really became to know them quite well. Anyway, he comes to me one year and says as follows. He said, it was a tragedy in his family. I knew about it. He had a daughter who broke with the family. First, non-observance. Then she ended up marrying a non-Jew, and then she ended up with that husband going on drugs. I mean, it was a catastrophic set of... miracle happened. somehow she broke from that, she cured the drug, came back to the family, became observant again. What's the problem? Problem is that she has fallen in love with a member of another very prominent Orthodox family in a different city. And by the way, that husband had the same experience. He broke from his family, went off, I don't remember if he married a non-Jew, but into drugs. And somehow by miracle he'd come back and become observant, and they fall in love with each other. So his problem is that he's a Kohen. And his rabbi told him, and his rabbi is a liberal and a very decent, wonderful person, admired a lot. He says to him, sorry, it's usher. Not only should you not encourage this, you tell them to stop it, but frankly he said if they insist on getting married, and they seem to be very determined, then you should not participate in the wedding and you should not be there. He says to me, first of all, emotionally, I really want to be there, I think there's an amazing relationship. And on top of that, he said, bluntly, I'm really worried myself. If I don't give them a Jewish wedding and show them the real acceptance, that she could break all over again and start the whole process of total disintegration over again. So what can you do for me? Well, of course, so I told him an honest answer. I said, as it is because of klal, pluralism, and my credibility in the Orthodox community is very low right now. And therefore, if I would do this wedding, I would probably be finished in terms of the Orthodox community. I can't do it, but I'll tell you what I would suggest you to do. And I thought about it aloud. I said, the first thing I thought about is, what does God want? What does God want here? It's not what's a rule in the book. What does God want here? Does God want people to have love, to have family, to have commitment with each other? Or does God really feel that because she had relations with a non-Jew, and et cetera, that she's not eligible for Kohen anymore? And I said, honestly, I don't think so. I really feel my heart. So I said to them, number one, I said, in my judgment, in halacha, if they marry, the marriage is tofes, the marriage is valid, even though they can't, even though it forfeits their kahuna for their children, but the marriage is valid. But it's a sin, and of course the rabbi correctly was telling him, according to most of the poskim, everyday living your sin is another sin. I said, but bluntly, I said, if I were you, I'd throw myself on the mercy of God and say, is in fact God going to treat this as a sin every day? And my answer is personally no. I said, secondly, I'll give you practical advice. Go find a conservative rabbi. Traditional conservative rabbi who will give you a ceremony that will, for your daughter and son-in-law to be, will be experienced as a traditional kedushin. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I can't perform it, but I'll come to the wedding, and we will dance up a storm together. That's what we did. Now again, I have to confess, my colleague, including a rabbi who I deeply admired, was very furious at me, partly because he felt it put him in a bad light. But it's also partly because, I heard afterward people said he performed this. Anyway, that was a major turning point because from that point on I began to say to myself, I'm not going to defend this law as the right law. I'm going to say I have a problem with it. At least that's the step one. Now step two is the Gioris experience. Again, rabbi people come to you, and I come to people with Kohen Gioris. I was shocked because I had never learned the laws and thought about them. The law simply is as follows. If the woman converts before she's 3 years old, it's okay. Because as the Gemara says, a woman is not Ru'uya Labiyah, she is not physically or whatever other eligible for intercourse before the age of 3. But after 3, she is. And therefore, if she converts after 3 years old, and she's a Gentile woman, that's a presumption of promiscuity and zona. In other words, any Gentile woman, by definition, is a zona, and therefore, when she converts to Judaism, she's a zona. And since the Torah says, you can't marry, that's why the Kohen can't marry. Well, that hit me pretty hard. First of all, I said to myself as follows, let's start at the beginning. In that culture, a woman was eligible for intercourse at 3 years old. It's a problem to this day. As you know, the whole business with Muhammad, and because he married a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old. So it's not 3 years old, but By our standards, it comes across as 3 years old, 9 years old. But that was a culture. So in that culture, women were eligible for intercourse after 3 years. My answer is good. But in my culture, this culture, thank God, it's beyond the pale. It's beyond any human acceptance, or at least if you're in any sort of venture about it, right? So I said the rabbi should say exactly the same thing. In that culture, you could assume that a Gentile woman is a zona. But in this culture, it's a dishonest, untrue, and false representation, and it's a chil Hashem. So I said to myself, the real problem here is not the Kohen who wants to marry the Gioret, it's the rabbis who are missing in action and should have been responsible a long time. We should have said what I'm saying. It's just the truth. Okay. So it began to grow upon me more and more, and the climax of this was about 4 or 5 years ago. It came to me, this fellow was a Orthodox, deeply committed Orthodox Jew, a Kohen, and he'd fallen in love with a Gioret. I said, why are you coming to me? He said, because his family had come around to see that this is the right woman and the right person, and they were willing to back him, but he couldn't find an Orthodox rabbi to do a marriage. I said, can you help me? So first of all, I spent some time talking to the couple. You know what hit me? This woman, far from being a zona, she is intelligent, she is kind, she's refined, she's moral, she's faithful, she's a wonderful human being, lasting moral, give me a break. She's a zona, right? So I said to him, look, I must confess to you honestly, I still don't have the political credibility, ability to marry you. But again, I'll say bluntly, I have no doubt in my mind that in Hashem's mind, she is not a zona. I wouldn't hesitate. And what I would do, I'd give you the same advice I gave. I gave the other slightly more political by now. I said, you can find a lay person, an Orthodox friend, who knows, who can do you don't need a rabbi for a ceremony. Go ahead and have an Orthodox ceremony with, and again, the rabbi won't do it because the rabbi says it's an avera, you can't do it. But I said, a lay person can get away with it, and then you know what? Go back and join a liberal left-wing Orthodox congregation where they want these questions. And I, guilty as charged. As it turned out, I couldn't be at the wedding to dance because I was abroad when they scheduled the wedding and it was not available, so they went ahead without me. But that's not the point. The deeper point is, and that's my conclusion in this situation, that the Kohen Gioret law is a failure of halachic responsibility. It's a betrayal of the Torah's commitment to justice. It stems from the dominance, and this is a tragedy of modern Orthodoxy, that right now we are dominated by what I call the Haredi model of SAC, which is that it's legal and the human impact is secondary or not admitted or not recognized. It's a reflection of the dominance right now of the idea, which is found, I'm sorry to say, in the heart of Yeshiva University, with Rosh Yeshiva who say openly the Torah has no emotions. Halakha is not to be judged by the issue of emotions or impact on human beings. Suffering, I heard a rabbi of that tradition, not of the Rosh Yeshiva, again, a colleague and an esteemed colleague, and but that's the point, who got up and once said, you know, Agunot, that's our Akedah, that's our Kiddush Hashem. That even though the women are suffering and being hurt and so on, they remain faithful to the tradition. But of course, the correct statement would have been that this is like human sacrifice, which the Torah hates, and which Yirmiyahu cries out, they did these things in my name because they thought they were sacrificing to God. That's the problem. He said, in Lo Tzivisi, I never commanded it, I never dreamt that anyone would take my Torah and claim, based on an Akedah, that you're allowed to sacrifice a kid to a God. So that's where I sort of leave the problematic now. So my answer is, honestly, I have been guilty of what Rabbi Brandon is guilty of. In my priorities, I felt there were thousands of women suffering as Aguna. But while we're on the subject of Aguna, it's exactly the same issue, right? In other words, the leading groups in Israel and America have basically said, either we can't help you, pay off the husband and get the get that way, or they have said, we'll give you a prenuptial, which will prevent future. But in fact, in the halakha, and in the international Beit Din, which was set up for Agunot, They pointed out there's a history of other powers. Rabbi Riskin, one of the really great and important ideas he ever had and has taught, is his PhD thesis is one use of nullification of hafka'ah, which would cover every possible case. If the husband's abusive, then the Chazal have the power to nullify a marriage. Now, it hasn't been used in centuries, but my answer again is that we haven't had these agunot, mesurah get made by the husband for thousands of people in centuries either. So we're back to the question again. My answer is, at this point, I feel the answer is that there's a major problem which needs the entire modern Orthodox community to speak up and say that the halakha has not been applied with a sense of completion. To me, that's the whole point I started about earlier about Brit. The covenant is between God and Israel to get to that perfection. And if along the way you have psakim that are imperfect or have negative effect, my answer is, of course, that's what Torah Sheval Peh is all about, to complete. In other words, that God gave it to us in the period of ancient Bronze Age, when women were beneath inferior. They were chattels. They were bought and sold. So the Torah starts the process of improving their condition with a goal of some days, but that's up to the Chazal and up to the rabbis and up to the leadership in every generation. So the answer honestly is that right now we have a major problem, which I think humanity has to A, recognize, and more important, speak up and put pressure that it, and this is why I feel this is such an important, even to me in terms of memory of Belda, Lindenbaum and Marcel, because Belda said very simply, she insisted, as my wife did, that Orthodox feminism is going to work within halakha. Having said that, she said, but when the halakha is wrong, you've got to push it. It's got to move. You can't just stand there and say it's wrong with halakha, we can't help you. And that to me is the critical step. And now if we finally shape up on all the other issues, I hope that we'll get to the Kohen Grusha or Kohen Gioret, even more offensive, sooner.
There's one thing I am sure of, and that is that Rabbi Greenberg, Admea ve'esrim Shana, portion in the world to come is guaranteed, and mine is not. Despite that fact, I need to state that I do not agree with everything that was just stated. But on some level, first of all, Rabbi Greenberg quoted Rabbi Soloveitchik. I had the privilege of living in the same apartment with Rabbi Soloveitchik for 4 or 5 years at YU. In a 1-bedroom apartment, 2 beds, 1 bedroom, and a dining room, living room area. The first few months I slept in a suit. It was so intimidating. But I do remember multiple times turning in my sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning and looking for my roommate and getting out of bed in sweats and seeing Rabbi Soloveitchik sitting in the dining room, asking what he was doing there at 3 a.m., telling me that he knows that there's a couple in love where it's a Kohen and a Grusha, and he knows he cannot allow them or tell them they can get married, but he knows the pain that will cause. But he felt that he needed to surrender his emotions to halakha. This is the same individual who I regularly saw senior Torah personalities walk into his apartment and chastise him for his breaking the glass ceiling on women's learning. I think it's extremely important to recognize the fact that if we articulate positions as righteous and as important and as sensitive that they are, that give off the opinion that halakha can change based on certain societal norms, which is not consistent with what is seen within halakhic texts, we put ourselves in the position that other things that we've advocated for can be viewed with the same, can be dismissed also, important things that we've advocated for. And we have to realize that if we're advocating for change that's within halakha, when we perhaps go a little bit over that line, what can be called into question is not the things that just go over that line, but other things also. And I think it's important that we recognize the fact that there's a certain danger sometimes in the process of trying to achieve everything, that we could actually lose some of the gains that we've made by some of the important leaders that we all turn to. One second, let me just finish the point. However, I think there are creative ways to look at these things. I'll just throw out one idea. As Rabbi Greenberg so properly said, that if a Kohen marries a Grusha, the Kedushin is Tofes. The halacha is that the Kedushin works. This is not like a Kohen marrying, a Jew marrying a non-Jew. The Kedushin is Tofes. Rabbi Greenberg's second statement was, however, the Kohen surrenders the kahuna, his kahuna and the kahuna of his children. On that point, I'd like to throw out one idea. And because it's being taped, I'm only going to throw out a piece of the idea. And that is, what happens if a Kohen was married a Grusha? And the Kohen marries a Grusha, and when the Kohen and the Grusha wish to have children, which is something that I think is halachically forbidden, and I recognize the sensitivity, but I saw Rav Soloveitchik surrender his own personal feelings on those issues, and he was as sensitive as I am. What happens if we told the husband and wife in this new age, although it might sound very insensitive and very unromantic, that when they want to have children, they should have children using IUI or IVF. In other words, the woman should be impregnated without a sexual act, not when they want to just make love, but when they want to have children. The woman should be impregnated without a sexual act, with IUI or IVF. Would halacha in that case rid the child of the status of kahuna? Because when the halacha says that the kohen, when the child is no longer a kohen, the halacha is talking about when there is the prohibition is an act of intimacy. What happens if they have children without an act of intimacy? Would the next generation would their progeny not be kohanim? I'm willing to, not in this forum and definitely not at 9:40 at night, I'm willing to make a strong case that halacha would not strip the children of their kahuna in those types of ways. I'm willing to make a strong halachic case for it. But I would make the case within the confines of halacha. I think that the point that's critical is that we need to be creative and we need to be aggressive. And mishum aguna hikilu barabanan, and any generation that doesn't deal with the aguna issue is just adding to the destruction of the temple. But there are certain things that I think we need to be very careful about, because when the same people are making the heroic acts on behalf of aguna, are willing to make other statements for the betterment of society, but perhaps are not consistent with the norms and mores of halacha, it doesn't just challenge on that issue that might not be within the paradigm of halacha, it also challenges their authority to do the things that, the heroic things they are doing within the norms of halacha. And I think it's important that we walk that balance. That's just...
I just want to point out the time. So very quick, and then...
I appreciate both the candor and the respect of Rabbi Brander's beautiful words, but about Rav Soloveitchik, I want to really quote Rav Soloveitchik in terms of what I'm talking about. Halachic man received the Torah from Sinai, not as a recipient, but as a partner with the Almighty in the act of creation. Now, what does that mean in plain language? And again, he says a little open that the earthly, and as the human partner grew up, that's a whole, I won't quote a whole medrash, God handed over dominion, that is to say, authority in the Torah, to the earthly court. The earthly court decrees, and the Holy One, blessed be He, complies. What it's really saying, what he's saying is that if the rabbinic court has the courage and responsibility to say that this is permitted and gives a good reason for it, as I said, I gave him lots of good reasons. How about, well, anyway, if they say that, then that God accepts the command. So the answer that you've gone beyond halakha, I want to point out to you that that's what they told Rabbi Soloveitchik when he taught women Torah. He was directly assaulted and criticized that he'd gone past the halakha. And I want to point out many other such examples. A lot of the things that Rabbi Riskin did were criticized in that way. He was more careful politically, and therefore he got away with much more, which is, I always admired that and appreciate that. But the bottom line is, I'm saying is that the answer that by saying openly that this should be changed, is an acceptance, which is to me that right now this is the dibuk and the problem of modern Orthodoxy. That they've accepted the Haredi model, that change and admitting change, because after all they have done the change, but admitting that I'm changing by authority, not of the local norms or whatever other ideological smokescreen. I'm doing it, I'm pushing for it because the Torah says a woman is a tzelem Elokim, and she's not being treated as an equal tzelem Elokim in a lot of areas. And half the things that Rabbi Randa now is happy to carry out were, and still are, called that treif in the other world. So if my overreach means that I lose credibility, it's because the rest of the people involved, including Rabbi Brander and his colleagues who have done tremendous things for Judaism, have not been willing to stick their neck out and say, we don't agree, or I wouldn't go that far, but I recognize this. And in fact, when the IBD was started, that's exactly what happened. Instead of welcoming that they're willing to use the power which Rabbi Riskin had proposed and which others had proposed. And he hasn't been able to use it again because politically he felt it's not going to fly. But my answer is that we're wrong, or that the people calling for these changes are wrong, or is that because there's a failure here of communal and religious leadership to take responsibility? And again, I hope it does not sound like pandering, because I feel Rabbi Riskin and Rabbi Brenda have among the leaders and the best we have in trying to make this thing work and move it forward. But at the same time, I'm saying we have to face up to this more honestly together. That we have to recognize that this is not importing foreign norms. That the woman is a fully equal in dignity is a fundamental norm of the Torah. And Breshit, how come the Torah allowed women to have a secondary quality? The answer is because it started in the 12th century when it was a big, BCE, when it was a big improvement to say, the Torah says that you can't, anybody can't sell a woman anymore. Only a father can sell a daughter, and he can sell her to somebody who will marry her. And when he marries her, he has to treat her like a full and equal free woman. But the rabbis, it's certainly a major step up, but it's certainly far from where we are now. And when the rabbis came along in the Gemara and said, we're going to make a ketubah, they didn't say, well, the Torah said she has the rights of a free woman, so how can I add, they said a ketubah. That's a revolutionary transformation. It means the woman is guaranteed, even in the case of divorce, that she will not be poor. She'll not be abandoned. So all I'm saying is, in all honesty, I feel we have to break that ideological binding our own hands, tying our own hands up and say, on the contrary, we are partners of Hashem. Hashem is depending on us to move it to the next level of full respect for Tzelem Elokim and the next level of halachic performance.
Thank you. I think the issue is on the table, and there's been a lot of learning, a lot of Talmud Torah about it. Bani Tova, did you want to?
We want to enable people to leave respectively and not one by one dripping out. So I'll just ask if there's someone that has a question that they feel we can't close without asking. And if that's the case, then I'll ask the prominent panel to answer. But if not, I'll respect the messages I got that we don't want to leave in the middle, so maybe it's time to wrap it up. So I'll ask any question that has to be asked.
I'm going to put one question to Rabbi Brander, if I may. Would your point of view be different for an older couple if there are no children involved?
No, I think that my point of view is the following, and that is, first of all, I don't view this as a women's thing. It's the man who's being deprived as much as the woman. In the case of a Kohen and a Gioret, or a Kohen and a Grusha, I'm skeptical when someone articulates this as just the woman losing out. I think that's sexist. It's the man who's also losing out. That's, I think, an important point. It's not man or woman. It's both of them that are in love with each other. They're both losing out. I just simply feel that if I am confronted with a case where a Kohen is married a Grusha, I will, God forbid, not walk away from my halachic responsibility of making sure I can help them. And I threw out an idea of them having children without a sexual act, simply because I think that is a creative way to not allow the kahuna. That might be a creative way to deal with the kahuna issue. That is not a small, I think that's an important halachic leap. I don't think that's a small halachic leap. I don't think that should be an ignored halachic leap. And I haven't heard anybody else articulate that perspective, although I'm not at 9:45, but I'm happy to make a presentation of why that I think is 100% halakhically okay. However, I just think it's just important to recognize the fact that if two people, consenting adults, want to get married, I'm not here to stop them. And I'm not here to stop a Kohen, a Grusha, a Kohen, and a Gioret. I don't think the word zonah should be interpreted the way it's being interpreted, because I think it's a halachic paradigm that needs to be looked at a little bit differently. But despite all of that, and I know I am definitely not pandering to the crowd, and I'm definitely not saying something that's politically correct, but I have too much at stake, as Rabbi Riskin also has. I have a responsibility to make sure that I promote the most cutting edge, at least in Israel, the most cutting edge institutions on women's leadership, on women's playing roles in the army, on men playing certain leadership roles, and on dealing with agunot. And I don't have the luxury or the halachic right or the moral right to sacrifice those responsibilities to entertain ideas that are not halachic, or at the present time I have not found anyone or any text, I don't care about anyone, that would allow me to marshal halacha to do some of the things that were articulated up here. That's my responsibility, because there's too much at stake. So while it may not be politically correct to say what I said, and I recognize sitting on this panel might come to this type of conversation, but I have too much respect for everybody in this room, and definitely too much respect for the integrity of what we're celebrating here tonight. Not to be honest. So I'm not saying that a Grusha and a Kohen, if they get married, I would treat them no different. It's not my place. I'm not God's policeman. But the bottom line is that I think there are halachic ways to deal with issues that I just mentioned, which I thought was a pretty creative way. And I also think that there are just, I just look at it from a paradigm of what we need to move forward. And whatever Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote is important, but I think his actions speak louder than his words. And his actions were that you must be wedded to halachic norms and mores. Be courageous when you feel the halachic norms and mores are societal, are society-based, not halachic-based, which is what Rabbi Soloveitchik did. But at the same time, recognize the fact that when they're halachic-based, you have to be willing to surrender your emotions, but find the most creative way you can to make sure that the couple you are engaging with can be dealt with in the most respectful way, because every human being deserves to be treated with respect.
Okay, so I want to really close here. I want to say that I'm really certain that Belda's vision, I hope, or I think, or I pray, we don't really know, but also that her spirit was felt here in this room, and that she really feels that some things that were extremely important to her were discussed, and I would use the expression you used, this was a cutting edge conversation. So thank you very much to everyone who survived with us until almost 10, and good night.